Leading a startup team, whether you're delivering a sugar rush, stocking coffee, or getting a regular delivery of snacks, Office Depot has solutions that fit every startup culture, from getting those first business cards and stationery to ordering fleece pullovers with your new logo. To learn how Office Depot and the California Technology Council have partnered to bring you savings on all of these startup essentials and more, go to californiatechnology.org/member benefits. I'm Daniel Levine, and this is the Bio Report. The pharmaceutical industry appears to have lost ground in 2015 on the ongoing debate around drug pricing, a problem that Christopher Bowe sees in part as a failure of leadership within the industry. In a recent guest column in Forbes, Bowe, who advises industry CEOs on communicating their strategies and ideas, argued that the industry needs CEOs capable of reframing the discussion with fresh ideas, forging new alliances, and disrupting existing business models. We spoke to Bowe about this leadership vacuum, why it's critical for the industry to move beyond its tired arguments, and what it needs to do to rebuild trust and credibility with the public. Chris, thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Danny. Happy to be here.
In a recent guest column in Forbes, you talk about a leadership vacuum in the pharmaceutical industry, that 2015 was the year of the anti-leader and the industry as a whole paid a price for it. What do you mean by the anti-leadership?
Oh, well, I guess when you look back at 2015, I was just amazed to see that some of the personalities and more importantly, these personalities were backed by ideas too, with ideas. Some of these personalities that burned the brightest were taking, or at least casting, a dark light on the industry. It was almost like taking it in a direction that was seemed more personal than for the greater good. And it didn't seem like a leadership that was striving to answer new questions. And so it was almost like working, I guess the way I originally conceived it in my mind was almost like an antimatter to matter. You know, there was a matter of leadership that could get us all to the place we all want to be, which means, you know, people get new drugs and everybody's happy with the system and, you know, value is understood. And then the situation that we had, which was almost like a mirror image of that, where people were scoffing at that, or just you know, sort of coldly saying that the way the industry operated previously was wasting money, and the only thing, it was really all about pricing and money and acquisitions in the core. So I looked at it and I was just astonished, and then at that, and just thought, wow, you know, where's the person stepping up with new ideas on the side of matter instead of antimatter, you know, to continue my analogy.
Well, the issue of pricing of drugs has been a storm that's brewing for a very long time, while the outrageousness of someone like Martin Shkreli, known in the popular press as Pharma Bro, gave the public someone who could remove abstract arguments of innovation and value and of high-risk R&D and make it simply about greed. There were certainly other companies in that mix as well. You don't have to dig too deep to find those examples. Do you think this has, in a material way, changed the policy discussion around the pricing of drugs?
Oh, I do. I think I mentioned in the piece, at least I've mentioned it before, that, I mean, part of the Turing conversation, I thought, and was that it was strange. It not strangely, it sort of like openly cracked open the Pandora's box on U.S. pricing, because suddenly people were free to say, well, if this is the way someone's operating, and someone's operating like that, kind of implying that working with just normal everyday constructs of the industry, that it must be far more pervasive than people realize, whether that's true or not. But we all know that there are consistent price increases on older drugs in the industry. It's been part of the model. So yes, I think this did change the policy discussion, or at least just put the industry. I mean, I guess at minimum, it put the industry in an even further defensive position, of which it continually tries to operate from. And I guess the basis of everything that I put forth in the piece was that I kind of see it time for getting off of the defensive and going on the offensive. And the offensive could be like trying to solve some of these issues for everybody, because the defensive seems to be we just want things to stay the same.
Well, you say we need a new kind of leadership, a pharma CEO who on his own would frame the future. Broadly speaking, what do you have in mind?
Well, let's step back and look at what the sort of the anti-leadership side I put. It's just one thing that really struck me was that this was a small, tiny company and CEO, private company, that everyone became so fascinated by. I mean, and I know that, there's a certain drama that the media likes. I'm well aware of what drives a story, but in the grand scheme of things, it's really incredible when you think about it that such a small player in all of this would get such attention. And secondarily, there was this long, fairly recent fascination with Valiant, with its, this is the model, this is the model, we're doing a new model. And fairly cynical. That's my opinion in their new model view. And so, but at the root of all of that are new ideas. And my belief is that aside from the usual just media interest in drama and controversy, that there was another kernel of interest for everyone, and including all stakeholders and audiences for the industry, in that they were interested in somebody putting forth new ideas. There was airtime for that. And so, in my view, that means that there's got to be airtime for a positive view of the future, new ideas like how do we talk about price? What kind of transparency should we talk about when we talk about price? What kind of policy initiatives might get us to a place where everybody's happy? What kind of models can we do where maybe we can talk about a different pricing structure, but maintain the legacy profitability of the industry? I don't hear anyone talking about that, and so those are just off the top of my head ideas, that the kinds of things that I think there's probably an audience for. People, there's this idea, anybody putting out an idea that seems to be brazen gets a lot of attention. Well, what about an brazen idea for the good? And I hope that answers your question. But that's kind of what I'm talking about.
Outlining the things that a leader needs to do, the first thing you say is they need to say something new, which I think speaks to the fact that this industry has really lacked, to use its own language, innovation in answering this issue.
Yes, and it just seems, no matter right or wrong, we all know that things exist in a gray area, not black and white. But right or wrong about the cost structure and how the costs and pricing works in the industry in the current model, people have stopped listening. They tuned it out. And I just think that now it sounds to them like defensive excuse for keeping the way that, keeping the things the way they are and the same. And so, and anybody talking about, there are a couple of interactions out there in reaction to my piece about maybe certain people doing some things out there in the industry, certain leaders, and to me it just seems still to be all nibbling at the edges. I'm not talking about ripping up their business model or in their entire company. No board or shareholders would support that. But, where's somebody talking about a new pilot project or saying something new about what the industry is all about, or saying something new about maybe a new path forward, a new vision for what the company or the industry should be in the future.
You also say the industry needs to build new allies. What's your thinking there?
Well, my thinking is that the skeptics and so-called, I guess, for lack of a better word, enemies list is just too long, and at some point you can't go on with people lining up on the other side. I mean, we've all had conversations with families and friends who don't have much exposure with the industry, and even they'll say, well, boy, as a consumer, I just don't know what's going on. I hear all this stuff. And so my view is that there's probably people that maybe companies or the industry see as not friendly, or particularly maybe a little bit antagonistic, that could be that you could get to work together, and working together might include some compromise, but to have them, get people who are involved in keeping people healthy. Doctors seem like a great place to start, and just build some new coalitions with ideas to maybe change things. I say, like, to disrupt things down the road, but that's going to take a little bit of listening to the other side. And another thing that's really important is that to build allies, something's got to be in it for the ally too, which means, listening to their ideas too, and maybe coming out and saying, this is a coalition to solve or explore some ideas on a new model or a new way of pricing drugs in a certain area. It just seems like there's so much room to explore still, that and yet you hear so little movement in that area.
Well, you talk about the need for a new business model. I'd argue the industry needs to acknowledge two things in that regard. One, that Big Pharma has been bad at cost-effective drug development, that there's been gross inefficiency that they haven't been able to fix, and that M&A as a whole has been a costly strategy for building companies.
Yes. What
might new models for pharma look like?
Well, first of all, it goes back. I wrote a note to myself before talking to you about that. When you think about the model overall, it just, it's all about cost structure, isn't it? So, in some way, delivering medicines that work and that people see that are valuable with a different cost structure to it. Other industries have wrestled with this issue. It just seems that this idea that, the pricing narrative is what we've seen, recent pricing narratives that the narrative is that they're based on the pricing of the old drug. Well, that just seems to be, that's no narrative at all. It just seems like that's basing your entire pricing structure based on a 50-year-old model. And when just about the entire world is telling you that model's got to change. So I guess to sum it all up, to really answer your question, is that smart people have to be able to come up with a better, faster, cheaper, because essentially that's what people are asking for, aren't they? Better drugs, faster, and at a lower cost structure. And yet I don't see a whole lot of pilots. And when you read corporate white space, or corporate transformation and disruption experts, they're always talking about no legacy model will ever allow the resources and thinking. They'll just strangle the resources and thinking for anything new that'll change its model. And so I've mentioned it a couple of times. I just don't see a whole lot of talk about even pilots, about this is this is a separate pilot of a completely new structure or model where we can lower the cost, so maybe the pricing structure is different, or lower the cost of developing these things, so that the U.S. doesn't bear all the cost of development, et cetera.
Well, the other issue I'd argue the industry needs to wrestle with is transparency. I think GSK's Andrew Whitty has been ahead of his counterparts on this one and shown some leadership. Do you see this as a big issue?
Transparency, yeah, well, it's an issue, that's for sure, because everybody believes. Not everybody. That's a strange way of saying it, but there are a lot of outside audiences that believe the industry isn't transparent. And the fact is that the pricing structure is not transparent at all. And which one of the things that came up with I remember it was sort of another seminal moment, I thought, was when a congressional committee asked one of the Hep C companies for, what are the costs that went into all of this? And I thought, wow, okay, people are really starting to question this. So if you removed the black box element, I think most people, think that this is just some sort of weird black box where this stuff comes out, and yet nobody's talking, or at least very few people are talking about the decisions or the elements that go into making a price or coming out with a product, albeit knowing that it's very complicated, the market access, the rebates, the discounts, all of that. But just let's talk about it in a new way.
Well, it's interesting you bring up the Hep C drugs. In recent years, there's been a shift in the industry's argument around pricing. In some regards, there's been a movement away from the issue of sunken R&D costs to the issue of value. And, in that regard, Gilead's hepatitis C drugs, Sovaldi and Harvoni, are interesting because, I'm wondering about your thoughts in how Gilead has handled the controversy over the pricing of those drugs, and whether the ongoing controversy suggests that the value argument isn't going to work for the industry.
It's an interesting question. I mean, the way I look at it is that it's essentially an argument about slices of the pie, isn't it? So the value argument from the pharmaceutical perspective, say Gilead, is that, you pay this money up front and we won't have all these downstream costs. Well, when you really think about that, all those downstream costs are revenue for really powerful constituencies, revenue for hospitals, revenue for doctors. So what you're talking about is an argument over slices of the pie. And hence that's where the value argument gets really complicated for pharma. And in some ways I've often thought that, clearly nobody's listening to it's only a 10% spend on the total budget. If you really believe it's valuable, why not argue for more? And I know people would think, wow, that may be crazy. Nobody would ever want to hear pharma say that we deserve more of the pie. But if the value is there, then we're going to have to talk about that. The same with to your point, it's going to come down with the gene therapy companies too, because the sole issue for them as well will be commercial reimbursement. If you cure something, if one of these therapies ends up curing something, that is a significant value long term potentially. And so how's that priced? How does the system work? And yet, we aren't having that discussion. And the value, the industry's got to get in there and talk about value and what all of this is worth, and transparently get in, present new ideas. Otherwise, people are going to keep saying that they don't deserve the money.
Well, in the end, much of this has to do with trust and credibility, and the industry's need to rebuild this with the public. We're in an age right now where I think there's been an institutional breakdown in trust and credibility.
Yeah.
What should industry leaders do?
Well, my view is that somebody's got to speak frankly. It's another sort of core thread, I think, through my piece, was that I'm just looking for someone to step forward and speak frankly that there are challenges and there's got to be a better way, and maybe present an idea. And if it's shot down, then listen to the other side and come up with other new ideas. The only way to rebuild trust, I think, is to present something new, because obviously it's just crazy to think that trust is going to be rebuilt by continuing on with the same deck. It's nobody's going to change their mind with repeating the same message over and over again that clearly hasn't worked in the last 10 years.
Chris Bowe, who advises CEOs in the healthcare industry on articulating and communicating their strategies and ideas. Chris, thanks as always.
Thanks a lot, Danny. I really enjoyed it.
Thanks for listening. The Bio Report is a production of the Levine Media Group. To automatically download this podcast each week, subscribe to our RSS feed or through iTunes or other podcast manager. To join our mailing list, go to levinemediagroup.com. We'd love to hear from you. If you want to drop us a line or are interested in sponsoring this podcast, send email to danny@levinemediagroup.com. Special thanks to Jonah Levine, who composed our theme music, and the Jonah Levine Collective, which performs it.